Um, I've had the pleasure of knowing Jimmy Cornell for many years. Judy and I first got to know him by buying one of his books. We'd never met him before, but we knew his reputation in terms of voyage planning and ocean routes. In my opinion, Jimmy is one of the world's, if not the world's greatest contributors to cruising and the cruising lifestyle, and particularly cruising the world's oceans. He certainly was one of the reasons that we were out there cruising. He's influenced the contemporary cruising scene more than any other sailor. He's an accomplished sailor, and take it from me, he's a great public speaker and author. He's sailed hundreds of thousands of miles. Thousands of sailors have fulfilled their dreams by following Jimmy's advice, either through his books or through one of his rallies. Many people don't know, or of all of the people that know of the Ark, probably less than half of the people know that Jimmy Cornell founded the Ark and ran the Ark for many years. After the Ark days, he also had other rallies, which Judy and I participated in one crossing the Atlantic. These are the books I alluded to in the beginning. These are, in my opinion, the necessary books if you're going to plan some sort of world voyage. The World Voyage Planner and the Ocean Atlas, which I was really, really impressed with the most recent one. I've asked Jimmy to talk about these at the end of his presentation. He's got a new project. Not very many people, many people give Magellan credit for the first circumnavigation, but most of us know that Magellan didn't make it. And it was really, I think, his navigator, Desafio Elcano, who completed the voyage. So Jimmy's newest project is to sail that route, to sail that route. And he's going to do it in a very unconventional way. He's going to do it with electricity and no carbon. It's an amazing, amazing thing that you're doing, Jimmy. We're all looking forward to that. So let me introduce my mentor, the guy that is the reason that Judy and I were able to sail around the world, Jimmy Cornell.
You. And coming up now with, okay. You had your problem, Bill. I have my own problem, but let's see that I do it here and it's okay. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Can you hear me? Okay, may I start, Bill? Or
yes, please go ahead and start. Right. We can hear you and we can see the slideshow.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm in a bit of a bind here because I'm in the boat yard where they are building my boat, which Bill just mentioned. I was supposed to get the keys to the office to be inside, but they forgot to leave the key. So I'm sitting in my car, hoping that I'll have enough battery power to last this presentation. And let's start on a positive note. Yes, Bill told you all about me, so there's no need for me to repeat myself. Whether I'm telling others or whether I'm doing it for myself, the main objective of planning a voyage anywhere in the world is to plan a route taking advantage of the prevailing winds and to always attempt to be sailing in good conditions and certainly to avoid bad conditions. To put it succinctly, is to always be in the right place at the right time, or even better, not to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I was asked by Bill to start a presentation of a voyage from Europe to across the Atlantic. You can start from anywhere in Northern Europe, Western Europe, and so on. So let's go. And basically, you have various options if you're leaving from Northern Europe or the Mediterranean, but we're only going to talk about sailing from these two starting points to the Canary Islands and then across the Atlantic. And Bill already mentioned my book, World Voyage Planner, which describes whatever I'm going to say now in greater detail, and also the atlas, which we compiled with my son Ivan, and shows the weather, wind, currents, and so on conditions throughout the world. So let's go. If you're starting from Western Europe, from Northern Western Europe, a very good place to start off from is the English harbor of Falmouth. And why? Because the most challenging part of this voyage, believe it or not, is not towards the end, in the middle, but at the very beginning. You have to cross the Bay of Biscay. And that is really quite a challenge because many boats start off from Europe without having the experience, or maybe the boat is not properly prepared. And crossing the Bay of Biscay could be a problem. And here I'm showing you on a windgram the kind of winds you can expect. On the right-hand side, it's a page out of my atlas, but in order to make it easier to understand, here is a compressed version. It's a summary of the weather conditions, the wind conditions for the month of June in that part of the world. The colors are very clear. If it's dark blue, it's force 4, light blue is force 5, and a little bit of green, if you see at the top, is force 6. And you can see that sailing from northeast to southwest, you will have part of the winds in your favor and part of them against you. If you go now to look in July, you will see that there are much better conditions with more westerly winds. And indeed, a crossing of the Bay of Biscay in July is probably the best time of year. Because if you look now at August, the conditions change again. There are stronger winds from the southwest. And if you see that the green at the top of the arrow, the left-hand side, you see that there's got a bit of green, which is winds over 25 or even up to 30 knots. Crossing the Bay of Biscay, one of the most attractive landfalls is La Coruña, and here you can see something that you may not believe it. This is a lighthouse from Roman times. It's 2,000 years old and marks the northwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula. There are very good facilities in La Coruña, various marinas, and it's a good place to start your cruise along the Spanish and then the Portuguese Atlantic coast. I have no time, unfortunately. I've only been given half an hour to make this presentation. It's a fantastically interesting place, stopping in the various ports all the way down to Lisbon. And then if you plan to sail first into the Mediterranean, you'll be passing the Cape of St. Vincent at the southwestern end of the Iberian Peninsula. You make landfall in Gibraltar, and the entire Mediterranean is ahead of you. The big mistake many people make, especially those who are not from Europe, is that they believe that it's just a large lake. Well, that's because it's over 2,000 miles from Gibraltar in the west to Lebanon in the east. So planning to spend only one short season or maybe a couple of months in the Mediterranean will be very enjoyable, but you won't be able to see much. And this is more or less to give you an idea of the Mediterranean, the wide stretch from the Straits of Gibraltar all the way to the east in Lebanon and Israel. Now, very briefly, the Mediterranean weather, and I'm here now in the south of France at La Grande Motte, which is halfway between, say, Barcelona and Marseille. And it's fairly cold for this time of year, and we expect a very strong wind tomorrow, a Mistral, with winds of probably 45 knots. So the season in the Mediterranean is quite limited from April to October. And during that time, really, the weather is quite reliable, good winds and so on. On the other hand, the winter season, as I start feeling it for myself now, starts from October and lasts throughout winter to April. The weather is changeable. From November to March, it may be cold with only spells of sunny days. So if you're planning to spend the winter in the Mediterranean, don't plan on doing it by sailing or cruising from place to place. Do it on 4 wheels. So anyway, very briefly, in the Mediterranean, the prevailing winds in summer are from the north, as you can see here. In July also, especially as you go east, the winds become stronger and more frequent from a northerly direction. And then finally, by September, you should be on your way out of the Mediterranean. And whether you take a direct route or you go, for example, via Madeira, you should make a good attempt, unless you are in a situation that I'll explain that later. The weather does change from the beginning of October, which is more or less now. The winds start getting stronger. So if you are on your way to the Canaries, it's a very good idea to leave the Mediterranean before the end of September. In my own case, and I'll explain it a bit later, I have no choice. The building of my boat has been delayed. So I'll be very lucky if I manage to leave here in about a week or 10 days time. So on the way to the Canaries now, again, I want to stress, very important to leave in good weather, which is about September at the latest. And you can sail non-stop. You can sail via Madeira or even via Morocco and the coast of West Africa. Now, if you arrive in the Canaries for an Atlantic crossing and you have time, well, the 8 islands of the Canarian archipelago are a wonderful place to cruise. If you start from the east, for example, from Lanzarote, you have 7 islands ahead of you to spend the time in October, early November, until it's time for the Atlantic crossing. Otherwise, you can stay in a place. They are very good facilities. Every island has several marinas. Repair facilities are very good. Or finally, what many people do is just leave the boat from the time of their arrival, fly home, and then return when it's time to start the Atlantic crossing. So just to show you here the kinds of winds you can expect on the way from Gibraltar to the Canaries, very good northeasterly winds. Occasionally maybe a bit too strong for some people's liking, but anyway, the winds are from the right direction. And as you arrive in the Canaries, the first landfall you may see is the island of Graciosa, a small island. And from there you have all the islands from northeast to southwest spread out ahead of you with very good sailing conditions, because the prevailing winds are from the northeast, and you can easily sail and visit all the islands. In my own case, I've been very fond of Tenerife, the island of Tenerife, for the last few years. Several of my transatlantic rallies, including the one that Bill and Judy took part in, started from Tenerife, Santa Cruz, the center, the marina. It's right in the middle of the capital, one of the most beautiful cities, if not the most beautiful city in the Canaries. And you can see you are really a few meters away, a couple of minutes walk away from the center of the city. It's an excellent marina, and I hope to be there myself by the beginning of November. And now we come to the actual meat of this presentation, is the strategy and tactics for an Atlantic crossing. And now something very important. I hope that all of you agree that climate is changing and we should be aware of it and accept it. And why? Let me just show you a chart which I only compiled a short while ago, and to show you how things have changed in the last 4 or 5 years. Excuse me, the hurricane seasons last longer. So now we have hurricanes in the Caribbean at the end of November, which is very late. And this is one of the reasons for this particular crossing from Europe to the Caribbean not to arrive before early December. So this is one very important rule to bear in mind. But throughout the world, certainly in parts like the Northwest Pacific, the seasons have become so extended that in parts of it, the Philippines, Hong Kong, southern China, and so on, the typhoon season now lasts all year round. There are also changes in the South Pacific. In the western part and the Coral Sea and so on, the season now lasts from November to May. In the eastern part, the French Polynesia, Cook Islands, and so on, the official season still lasts from November to April, but it's still probably too early to arrive there. If you plan to arrive in Tahiti, it's better to arrive in May or even June. Sailing across the Atlantic, the routes have changed very little in the 500 years since Columbus sailed from the Canary Islands to what is now the Bahamas. There is the ram line, the direct line, which, as very often in ocean crossing and ocean passages, is not necessarily the fastest crossing. Why? Because the true northeasterly North Atlantic trade winds do not start in the Canary Islands. You have to descend maybe to 20 degrees, maybe to 18 degrees north, virtually to the Cape Verdes, to pick up the actual trade winds. So if we look on the next chart here, I have the same routes lined out. I would certainly not recommend to sail the direct route across the Atlantic, but to either do what is the classic route, to sail southwest, passing just northwest of the Cape Verde Islands, or to pass closer to the Cape Verde Islands, because in that case, if you do have a problem, there is a marina, you can stop, you can reprovision or do repairs, and then continue from there, and you have a much better chance of getting proper, reliable northeasterly trade winds if you start from the latitude of the Cape Verde Islands. And here is something that you can see that indeed, from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean in November, and I stress in a normal year, and we don't live in normal times, you should expect to have prevailing northeasterly winds. Unfortunately, it has changed. There's still a high proportion of northeasterly winds, but as I said earlier, it's much better to descend towards lower latitudes like 18 degrees north or even 17th, and sail from the latitude of the Cape Verde Islands west. If you do make a detour to the Cape Verdes, as I said, they are beautiful islands if you have time to visit at least some of them. There is a marina on the island of St. Vincent, on the northwestern part of the island, Mindelo Marina. It's a fairly large marina, fairly well managed, so it's certainly a very good place to stop before you cross the Atlantic proper, because it's still 2,000 miles from the Verde Islands to the Caribbean. And at this point in the normal year. But basically, from the Cape Verde Islands to the Caribbean, the winds are definitely northeasterlies. You see, again, with the colors, most of the winds are force 4 in the dark blue, or force 5, light blue, and then green, occasionally winds that are over 25 knots. If you're lucky, and I have been lucky on most of my many Atlantic crossings, you'll have very good trade winds. Have a spinnaker prepared, like this Aventura 3 crossing, or at least pull out your jib. But you have to watch out for something. And those of you who haven't sailed previously, or don't have experience of the tropics, you have to be very much aware of tropical squalls. They are visible and day and night, and certainly on radar, and you have to take action very quickly. When you see a squall, and they always travel with the wind, so you have to always be looking into the direction of the wind, or ask the person on watch to do just that. This one has just broken, it's coming, and it will reach you within maybe something like 5 minutes or so. So you have to really act very promptly, drop the spinnaker, and if you are really cautious, maybe sail with one reef and mainsail, or furl up your Genoa or whatever, but do take action in good time. You don't have much time to do it, because when the wind arrives, it arrives very, very quickly, and the winds can be very strong. It will go from trade wind force 15 to 18 to 20 knots to 30 and possibly even 35 knots. And here you see one we're heading for a squall, and this one is coming our way also. So you can see it, but remember, you must always look into the direction of the wind. So some tips on autopilots, and I know very well what goes wrong during an Atlantic crossing because I've been sitting on the receiving end, as it were, in the Canaries, first when they left and then in the Caribbean. And I know how much damage some people have suffered because of a very simple mistake. Never set the autopilot to steer to compass if there is any risk of squalls or change in wind direction. Why? Because if you are on compass, the automatic pilot will keep that course and force the boat to continue sailing in that direction, even if the wind has changed. You must always, when you are expecting these kind of conditions, to steer to wind, to set the pilot to wind. Now that was a very fast crossing of the Atlantic, but I don't have much time, so I have to push on. So my favorite landfall in the Caribbean coming from the east is Barbados. Why? Because it sticks out into the Atlantic and it's the shortest crossing. It also is a very good place to arrive. It's got this beautiful large bay where you can anchor, Carlisle Bay. The formalities are fairly simple, and as a result of the rallies which took Barbados in recent years, they have started this facility where you come site here on arrival, you clear customs, immigration, and health, and then you're free to go either back to anchor in the Carlisle Bay, which you saw, or smaller boats, in catamarans up to 50 feet, if they don't have a beam over 8 meters or 7 meters 80, you can come into this small old port in the middle, in the center of the capital Bridgetown, the old Carinage. And we have here one of the rallies arriving there, and it's a very nice place to be. You are in the Caribbean, in the middle of this vibrant town, and if you don't want to stay at anchor, you have a choice to come into the Carinage. A very important tip for those who are planning to spend some time cruising in the Caribbean is that you should do some advanced planning. If you arrived in Barbados, it's a good example that if you start visiting the islands from south to north early in the season, you've made a great mistake, a big mistake. Why? People who arrive in the Caribbean from the United States or from the East Coast or from Florida and so on have a much better chance of enjoying the best conditions if they sail and cruise from north to south. Why? From December to February, the winds are prevailing northeasterlies and then easterlies. And then as the season progresses towards March, April, the winds become southeasterlies, and it's better at that stage to visit the islands from south to north. And you can see it here. If you look on these 2 pages out of my atlas, in December, you can see the winds are absolutely from the northeast, mostly force 5. The 5 bars, the feathers on those arrows are the force of the wind. That's force 5, that's winds of 20, 25 knots. And that's how they're in December. But then gradually, as the season moves on, by May, you can see the winds are from the southeast. So this is why it's easier to sail at the beginning of the season from north to south, but then at the end of the season, from south to north. So I've taken you to the Caribbean. So what next? Well, there's a lot of alternatives, and especially now with COVID, you have to plan your voyage even more carefully. If you are in the Eastern Caribbean, you have the option of sailing to the Azores if you want to return to Europe, or sail to the US East Coast. You can do that non-stop or via Bermuda, and then return to Europe along another route, a northern route, or sail to the Bahamas and Florida, and finally sail to the Western Caribbean or Panama if you are on a world voyage. Before I carry on towards Panama, I want to give the options for those who would plan to return to Europe. The majority of the boats only do a 1-year circumnavigation of the North Atlantic, arriving in the Caribbean in December and returning to Europe or maybe to the United States in April, May. If you want to return to Europe, the best way is to sail directly to the Azores, and that will be maybe in late May. The other solution, if you don't want to leave and you want to stay in the Caribbean, you have to be extremely careful now because of the coronavirus pandemic. The rules, I'm sure all of you know, have been strengthened. They haven't allowed boats to spend the season there. Some have not even been allowed to enter certain ports. And also you have the added problem that because of the hurricane seasons being now more extended, many insurance companies will not offer you an insurance or not cover the boat for the hurricane season unless you move right south to Trinidad, which may not be to your liking. So it may be well worth consulting your insurance company before you start making plans where to spend the coming season, hurricane season, because you may not obtain insurance. And of course, I'll come back to COVID as well. This was another major problem this year because boats were not allowed to go into certain ports. It was very difficult for them to leave. Several boats actually were shipped to Europe, but I hope that by next year, the COVID situation will improve. Anyway, if we are sailing from the Eastern Caribbean to the Azores in late May, you can see the winds are easterlies. You might be close-hauled at the beginning of the voyage, but of the passage, but you should be able to pick up reasonably good winds. And this is why I show you here the position of the Azores high. You can see that the winds, how they move around the high. Traditionally, boats leaving from the Eastern Caribbean for the Azores would sail to Bermuda and then sail northeast to pick up the prevailing westerly winds. I don't think that's all that important or such a good idea anymore. If you have now access to weather information and so on, as most of us have, it is quite possible to set a reasonably well planned direct route from the Eastern Caribbean to the Azores, and scores and really hundreds of boats do it every year. Azores are a great place to visit on your return. Several islands and so on, very good marinas and repair facilities. And then from there, if you want to continue to mainland Europe, you can see that you're heading in the northeasterly direction and the winds are prevailing southwesterlies. So very good winds for your return to either to mainland Europe, in Northern Europe, or to the Mediterranean. Other Caribbean alternatives at the end of the season is, as I said earlier, sail north towards or northwest towards the United States, maybe to Florida, or continue to Panama. So the winds at the end of the safe season in May are very good. You have either northeasterly or southwesterly winds, and you should have a fairly good run all the way to wherever your destination would be on the East Coast. Now, I was asked once what would be the alternatives of a longer return voyage from the Caribbean, and indeed, you can see here all the various permutations. If you start from Antigua in the southwestern point there, and you sail to the east coast of the United States, you can continue maybe to Canada or even as far as Greenland. If you spend the winter in the United States, the following spring you can continue all the way to Iceland, possibly even as far as Spitsbergen, as I have done myself, and then from there you can come south and to Norway, and then back home, wherever home might be in Western Europe. On the other hand, I also showed you the route from the Eastern Caribbean to the Azores and continue from there, as we explained earlier, to Western Europe. Or if you continue around the world, then probably by February, March, you're planning to sail west from the Eastern Caribbean to Panama. The winds are fairly good. You can have an idea here. In March, for example, the winds are from the northeast and you're sailing west, perfect winds, maybe sometimes a bit too strong, but you have certainly winds from the good direction. The one point that I need to make is that as you sail west towards the Panama Canal before you transit and arrive in the South Pacific, by the end of the safe season, March, April, the strong trade winds are pushing the water westwards towards the Central America and so on, and there are fairly rough seas in the approaches to Panama. So this is something to bear in mind if you plan on sailing across from the Eastern Caribbean to Panama later in the safe season. And then we come finally to the route options from Panama. I wish I could take you any further, but there's no time. You can sail north to Costa Rica once you transited the Panama Canal, to Mexico, to Baja California. You can sail to the US West Coast and Canada, not direct. I'm sure it's not an easy ride, maybe via Hawaii. You can sail west to Micronesia. And of course, the majority of the boats will turn left in Panama and they will sail to the South Pacific, either directly or via the Galapagos Islands, or even one fantastic detour, which I made once many years ago, to Easter Island. Or you can turn absolutely left and sail along the coast of South America, its west coast, which I did myself once, and sailed to Peru. So, Bill very kindly mentioned my various books. They are still on sale on Amazon. It's probably easier for you to get them. And new editions or updated editions are published continuously. My own company now, Cornell Sailing, is selling these books and distributing them in the United States. But one book which I've written not so long ago is my favorite. It's the only personal account of my long voyage. Sorry, I should say my long life. Long voyages, yes, at 200,000 miles and so many circumnavigations, and also the fact that I'm now 80 and I've done a lot of sailing in the last 45 years when I started seriously sailing. Anyway, there's a lot of information about my books, updates, and so on cornellsailing.com. And also, of course, I need to mention why I'm here. 200 meters, 600 feet for my boat without internet connection. My boat, it was launched just 2 weeks ago. Here we are sailing, doing some sail tests. It's a fast catamaran. As you probably know or should know, Outremer are building performance cruising catamarans. They are cruising catamarans, very comfortable, but very fast. We're doing here 14 knots. And the wind is only about 16 or 18 knots. It's a very well designed catamaran. It's 48 feet, although it's called the 45. And it's starting a new series of Outremer catamarans, Catamarans 40, zero carbon dioxide footprint. And that's my aim. This is the route which I hope to start in the next couple of weeks or so, sailing around the world along the historic route that Magellan started, and then he was killed in the Philippines, and the command of the expedition was taken over by Juan Sebastian Elcano, a young Spanish man, actually from the Basque Country, and he completed it successfully 500 years ago by arriving with the remaining crews in Sevilla. And here is the message we're going to carry. This is the spinnaker, which I only put up a few days ago, Parasail spinnaker, and you can see our logo of the Elcano Challenge, which Bill mentioned that we carry his name because he was the man who should be credited with having been the first to sail around the world. And we carry a very important message for the future of the planet. On one planet, one future. And indeed, my boat is 100% carbon, will have zero carbon emissions. I have to be very careful because my mast is carbon, so I can't say that it's carbon free, but it's only one use carbon. But I'm talking about the fossil fuel consumption. We don't have a generator on board. We will not even plug into shore power when we're stopped anywhere. And furthermore, the main advantage of this boat, and actually at the heart of this concept, is that when we're sailing and the propellers are turning, they are producing electricity. So that I have a very large capacity of batteries, about 56 kilowatt capacity. So I can, at cruising speed of about 4 knots, I can motor for about 15 hours. There's a lot more information on my website on Cornell Sailing, a very recent report which I posted, and you get a lot of information about my voyage and about this boat itself on cornellsailing.com. I rushed through it all. I wish I'd had more time, but I knew from Bill that you may have questions. So I'll be very happy now to hand over to whoever is going to tell me what the questions are and for me to answer them. Thank you very much.
That'll be Tilo. Tilo will
Yeah.
moderate the questions.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm happy to moderate questions both on the Zoom side of things and also on the YouTube side. And so if anybody has any questions, what's good is if you just let me know that in the chat, and then we can proceed with the questions. Now I can start off actually, Jimmy, because right now I don't have any other questions coming up here, but you talked about the weather being fairly consistent, but when I sailed across the Atlantic, I ended up crossing in an El Nino year, and that shut down the trade winds. We were largely becalmed, but that was 20 years ago. I don't know how climate change has played with the El Nino phenomena.
Not only El Nino, as I said, I was very careful. I probably guessed your question when I said in a normal year, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like you have problems in your life or in your marriage, and you say normally we get on very well. Now, you never say whether normally means 10% of the time or 90% of the time. So it's the same thing with the weather. There's one thing that's definitely happening, and unfortunately, trade winds, consistent trade wind areas have been affected. I could talk about climate change for the next hour. It's happening. It's affecting everything. It's affecting the hurricane seasons. It's affecting the trade winds. It's affecting the constancy of trade winds and so on. The El Nino, which you mentioned, is a phenomenon that occurs every 2 or 3 or 4 years. It is well known, and indeed it affects weather conditions. Now we know almost throughout the world, but certainly very much in the Pacific. That is something to be borne in mind. But beyond the El Nino, what I keep saying, we have to be much more careful than in the past. Before, when I started sailing all those years ago, the hurricane seasons were really very, very precisely defined. Now, you have the safe season in the South Pacific, and I mentioned the Coral Sea and the Western South Pacific, Australia, Fiji, Vanuatu, and so on. They've had, and the safe season is from June to November. Last year, they had cyclones in June, July, and even September. So things are changing. And this is the reason why I would tell you, if you plan to do a long voyage and you can afford it, like Bill has done it, Bill and Judy, do it when you still can. The weather is not going to get better, unfortunately. It may, but we may not live that long. This is why I'm in a hurry to do this voyage myself and to leave as soon as possible.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, I think what you're saying is there's, the best way to know when to set off is just to look at the good weather predictions. I guess the old rules of thumb of you should leave on thus and such a date if you're going from France to the Canaries don't necessarily hold true anymore. Is that correct?
No. I still believe that being able to leave the Mediterranean and or Northern Europe before the end of September, it still holds. The weather has been changing, but not so much in the Mediterranean. Although we had a very bad, what is called the Mediterranean hurricane 2 weeks ago in Greece. That's a new phenomenon. But basically, from May to September, the weather is quite okay. And sailing to the Canaries, definitely, if you can do it before September, although I'm going to do it before October. I hope the weather is still okay. You might have stronger winds, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Arno had a question. He was curious about if you were. He's seen that there are multiple editions of your books and they're being updated. Are you doing that, or do you have a team doing that?
Yes, Team Jimmy Cornell, 1+0. Yes, I'm doing everything. You know, I'm doing this talk. I'm writing an article for a magazine this afternoon. I'm preparing my voyage for 32,000. My boat for 32,000. I'm getting up at 6 in the morning and sometimes a bit earlier. I don't have a team. I have a designer who helps me, but basically the books are, and I'm publishing them in German and in French and so on. Yes, I'm a sort of machine, you know, if you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Paul has a question for you. He was asking if that he's planning on taking part in the rally on the Amazon, and he's planning to sail from Cape Verde to Belém, Brazil, in early August next year, so August of 2021. Do you think that's sensible timing for the crossing going in August?
Yes, it is. But I didn't understand from what this is a rally from the Azores to Brazil or from the Cape Verdes.
It's actually on the Amazon. It's a rally on the Amazon.
No, I don't know about it, but yes, I mean August is a fine time to cross. So up to now, there's only been one hurricane in the South Atlantic many years ago, Hurricane Katrina. The hurricanes don't really reach the South Atlantic. So basically, it is a safe time to go, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great.
Let me add to that. We were talking about weather. There are two things in Brazil at the current moment. COVID is out of control. So there's something to bear in mind. It might hopefully improve by August or September when you get there. But that is something definitely to bear in mind.
Mm-hmm. Certainly so. What is your, Paul, let's see, Bill is asking, what is your recommendation for sleeping when doing a circumnavigation single-handed?
Well, we're talking to cruising sailors, don't. I mean, if you want to do cruising, I mean, I don't think it's very enjoyable. I mean, unless you want to prove something. See, I never try to prove anything. I always want to enjoy myself. Yes, I'm doing a very challenging voyage, but I do it because I enjoy it. It's a fast boat. It's something I'm doing. I want to show that it can be done in an eco-friendly manner and so on. If you want to sail around the world on your own, it's a challenge, I admit, but you have to be prepared for the fact that occasionally you have to sleep, and in that case, you might have a problem not being able to see what's happening, or maybe you're running into danger. However, it's now only 3 days that I've been asked to take on board a so-called device, an Oscar, like the Oscar awards in the film industry. And this is a forward-looking device that can scan the area ahead of you up to 500 meters, which is a very long way. And it would pick up not only waves on the surface, certainly trees or any flotsam, certainly, absolutely, certainly containers, but even a small boat and even small objects. And this is very well advanced. I'm testing this prototype, and I will be able to report on it when I start my voyage. So well worth looking up my reports on my website. It is something very, very interesting. It's very expensive, but then don't ask me what is not expensive when I'm sitting here where they're also building next to, I'm looking at now at the shed where they're building the next gunboat. So if you tell a gunboat owner that this forward-looking device costs about $25,000 and a gunboat starts at $6 million, it's cheap.
Okay, yeah, indeed. Okay, so Dennis was asking about routes going over to Brazil. going from the Cape Verdes, would you recommend going to the northeast of Brazil, or sort of in a route that's similar to what you have planned for your Elcano, or what you did on your Elcano route, or do you think it's that going directly to the Amazon is an idea?
No, absolutely. No, this is, I don't want to make you buy the atlas, but if you look at my atlas for the month of August, September, you will see that the doldrums start quite wide in the eastern part and they start narrowing down towards the western part, which is the Amazon. And you will see that the further west you go, the shorter crossing of the doldrums you have to do. So let me call it the tropical convergence zone, intertropical convergence zone, also called the doldrums. The atlas will help you decide where you should cross. But if you're going straight to the Amazon, you're going obviously heading for Belém, yes, absolutely lay a direct course. Also, eventually you have the current and the wind.
Okay. Sort of on a similar question, Roger is asking if you have any comments on the Pacific Northwest High, and he said that he's heard that the trip from Hawaii to the Pacific Northwest has become much less predictable these days.
Well, I don't agree with that. It was always unpredictable. I sailed from Hawaii to Sitka, and there were people crossing at the same time. You have to be very patient. Really, leaving from Hawaii, you have to go northeast, and you have to be very careful that you don't turn east too soon. Everybody should know the position of the North Pacific High at that time of year, and you really have to loop around it. Some people virtually run into it and put the engine on and cross it under power, which is quite possible. But otherwise, you really have to loop around it. Go northeast and then loop around the northern edge of the high. It's not a problem. I did it, as I said, many years ago with my son Ivan. We sailed from Antarctica to Alaska, and we sailed on this leg from Hawaii to Sitka, and we had absolutely no problems. But definitely, as we reached the western edge of the high, we had to use our motor. But it's very easily. It's not a difficult route to plan.
Okay, great. Scott is asking, what are your thoughts on doing transatlantic crossings and circumnavigations in non-blue water production boats? He said that he was looking at the ARC website, and it seems that there are a lot more production boats taking on these longer trips. Also, as a follow-on question to that, what is the biggest mistake that first-time transatlantic skippers tend to make?
Right. Well, first section, yes, there's no question that there are a lot of good, well-produced production boats. And so you have a very wide choice. And it's very difficult to say. But you have to be very, very careful just when you buy a car. If you want to save money and you buy a cheaper car, you will not get such a good quality out of that car as you get out of a more expensive car. And it's exactly the same for boats. So not always, but in most cases, a lower price spells less good quality finish and reliability. It's not rocket science, but there are plenty of boats that you can choose from. Maybe it's better to buy a used boat, which has at a better price and it's a stronger boat than buying a new boat that looks very attractive but may not be all that good or that reliable. To the second question, what was the question? I can't remember it. The second half of the question.
The biggest, what do you think are
the biggest
mistake?
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, the biggest mistake, yes. Well, I know I've done so many surveys on the subject and I've had the ARC, I ran it for so many years. I think, this is a difficult question. What's the biggest mistake? What's the biggest disappointment when people reach the Caribbean? Maybe the boat wasn't well prepared. Maybe the boat wasn't up to the expectations. Maybe the boat wasn't large enough, comfortable enough. But a very serious source is maybe that's not the kind of life you want to lead. People often buy a dream, and that dream may not be theirs, might be the dream of the person writing the books or inspirational books and so on. I hope I don't fall into that category. And you believe that everything is easy, everything is working out very well, that you have a fantastic life and so on. It's not as easy as that. Unless your heart is in it, like unless you have this passion for the sea, which I have, you may be disappointed. And this is what you have to be sincere with yourself. Do I really want to do this? Would I be really happy on a boat, crossing an ocean, having to deal with all the problems and the challenges and so on? So I find that about 20% of the people in my rallies who crossed the Atlantic arrived in the Caribbean very disappointed. It wasn't what they had expected. Not because the weather wasn't right or so. There were other subjective factors, as I said, the boat, but more often than not, their expectations. And this is something that I stress. Do be honest with yourself, you know. Yes, I mean, I wish Bill would speak about it, about this, and he may do it on another occasion. I mean, he and Judy knew exactly what they wanted. They were prepared to put up with all the privations and tribulations, whatever you want to call them, and they did. But there is a price to pay, and I don't have the time to go into that. All I want to say is that it is a dream. Some people manage to live it. I've been living it for the last 45 years, but it may not be okay for you.
I think you had a good answer, and I think the core of your answer is that about a third of the people have unreasonable expectations, that they've sailed for 20 years, but they were home every night, you know, that they sailed. And crossing an ocean for 3,000 miles is different. It's a different thing, and you really have to enjoy the sea and enjoy the challenge and work through it. You can certainly get frustrated if your expectations are, you know, the daily sailing that you did for so many years.
Yeah.
So it's different. So,
but this is why, you see, please forgive me, all of you who are listening, that I mentioned my book, 20,000 Miles. In that book, I describe my voyages, my life, what I've done, and everything that I do and say is backed up by the practical side of it. So you will be reading there about cruising as a family, repairing a boat, dealing with emergencies, and so on and so forth. It's a very honest, I say it, I hope you allow me to say that, it's a very honest thing. And then if you read that book, and at the end of the book you said, great, that's what I want to do, you'll do the right thing. But you might very well end reading that book and say, okay, well, I'm grateful to Jimmy that he's written things in such a plain and honest and direct manner, and he helped me to make up my mind, this is not for me.
Okay, great. Now, David Bruce had a question about, you brought it up in the beginning of your presentation about the transit of the Bay of Biscay. Is there any time that you would say is the you know, what's the best route and what's the best timing that you could give for transiting Biscay?
That's a very good point. Yes, thank you. I mentioned at the beginning, I can dwell on that subject again. You have to cross the Bay of Biscay. The price you pay for coming from Northern Europe towards Spain and then continue towards the Caribbean. It's short. It's only 350, 400 miles. This is why it's a very good idea. I give you the best port to be in. It's Falmouth in southwestern England. There you can wait. And nowadays, the weather forecasts are so good, so reliable, that you'll find the 4-day window. If you're concerned, you just wait. And then you quickly cross. The shortest crossing is to La Coruña, as I meant. And June is a good month. The winds are quite good. July are not so good. And August is okay again. By the time September comes, it's very bad. It's very, very strange. For some reason, around the first or second week in September, almost every year there's a very bad storm. And the big problem is that all these storms come from the southwest, and the Biscay is relatively shallow, so it creates some very, very rough conditions. And big ships have succumbed to the weather conditions there. So this is why it's very important, on the one hand, to pick your time of year, from June, July, summer, and to start, on my advice, from Portsmouth, because you can wait there. There are 3 marinas in Portsmouth. You can wait there, and you definitely, in summer, there's no question, you have a reliable forecast where you can see that you will have northeasterly winds or whatever for the duration, which we're only talking about maximum 4 days.
Okay. And he also asked, what's your opinion on going south to north? Going back to England, what's the best route and timing for that?
No, from where to where?
I believe from Portugal going up to England.
Okay, well, first of all, be very careful. If you, in summer, like I have some friends who just visited me 2 days ago, on the west side, on the west coast of the Iberian Peninsula, meaning Portugal and Spain, I'm talking the Atlantic side, you have the so-called Portuguese trade winds in the summer, from July to end of August, very strong, 25 knots. So coming from south to north, very, very difficult, very difficult. You either have to do it at the beginning of the season in June or a bit later. If you do it at the beginning of the season in June, sailing from south to north is fine, because you will not have these winds and you have a good chance of crossing the Bay of Biscay in relatively good weather. If you do it later, after the end of the Portuguese trade wind, which is about September, you run the risk of running into a storm in Biscay. So ideally, sailing from south to north is better. There is a way of avoiding the Bay of Biscay, and that is sailing towards Ireland or possibly into the Irish Sea. You don't cross the worst part of the Bay of Biscay, and then you can sail to Scotland and possibly through the Corinthian Canal to reach the North Sea. So that is an option to bear in mind, because you can sail straight from, let's say, Lisbon and set sail for Cork or just the Irish Sea, and then stay inland there between England and Ireland, up to Scotland and through the Corinthian Canal into the North Sea. And that is a fantastically interesting cruise.
Okay, just one more question that came up on this this Biscay topic, and James asks that he thinks he may have to cross Biscay from England to Spain in December. Any advice on that?
Well, take Father Christmas with you. No, that's not good. Why December? Oh, this year in December?
Yes.
What boat?
Garcia 45.
Oh yeah. Not one, Mike. Not the Exploration.
No.
No. Okay. No, there is no Garcia 45. Oh, the older Garcia. Okay. Right. Well, it's not a boat. I mean,
yes.
It's the people sailing it. I mean, who is on board? If you have experienced crew, yes, anything can be done. But again, then my advice is even firmer on go to farmers and wait. Even in winter, you'll probably have a good window for 3 or 4 days that will take you right across to La Coruña. That's the shortest route. So I think that if you have to do it in December, of course, I've done it early in the season, not so late in the season. And again, it's a matter of luck, but there's also a matter of choosing your time of departure carefully. Just go to farmers and wait there for a good window.
Okay, great. One other routing question we had was from Guillaume, who was asking about how is October or November to go from Trinidad to Panama? This is, at the beginning of the season. Is this the best time, or is...
No, it's the end of the season. So you mean in November, at the end of the hurricane season, That's what you mean by that.
Or the beginning of the
October, not.
Caribbean season, yeah. Mhm.
Definitely not October. Absolutely not. There are hurricanes in this. I mean, there were this year hurricanes in October. Definitely not. Even if you stay in those southern, there is a chance. Of course, Trinidad being that far south, and if you do avoid Venezuela, but you sail through the ABC Islands and so on, you have a chance. But I cannot possibly, with my name and reputation, advise anyone to sail across the Caribbean Sea during the hurricane season, which is October. Wait until November. Ideally, wait until late November, because there have been hurricanes in Panama in late November, and that's why if you get the latest edition of my book Work Within the Rules, but it is now published in 2019, then you will see that I mentioned there are several hurricanes that have occurred in the Western Caribbean late in the season. So if you have to cross from Trinidad to Panama, I would not do it before the end of November, really.
Okay, great. So now, of course, this is the Amel crowd that you're talking to, but it's obvious that you're going to be circumnavigating on a catamaran, and this brings up the age-old debate of monohulls versus cats. Obviously, as someone who has extensive experience on both, what are your thoughts about the pros and cons of each? And specifically, is there a specific reason you chose a cat for your next journey?
Well, it's very simple, the question. I want to do this on an electric boat. But you cannot consume electricity anywhere, and certainly not on a boat, without being able to produce it. And the only way to produce electricity on a boat, you can't have a wind generator or a towing generator. It's not enough, or solar panels. You have to regenerate it with your propellers. In that case, you need a fast boat. And for that, I have a Ultramare, which is a performance cruising catamaran. I was sailing here at 18 knots yesterday under code 0. So it's a very fast boat. I'm not saying that it sails at that speed all the time, but when you are sailing and the propellers are turning, and this is a special, I don't have enough time to talk about it, but the propellers are turning, they are regenerating electricity. And Ocean Volt, the company that produced the propulsion system, have developed a very special propeller, which is called a servo prop. It's a variable pitch propeller, which can be digitally controlled. The pitch can be set into the optimum position, and you will not believe it. We're sailing at 14 knots here, and we're producing 6.9 kilowatts of power. That is unheard of. Normally, you produce with a towing generator 600 watts at 6 knots, maybe 800 watts at 8 knots. But this propeller, the one propeller, because I have two, this one propeller would produce, on average, between 1 and 2 kilowatts. So we can recharge the batteries and electric cooker and all the rest. So this is, as I said, it's a very technical subject, but basically I chose a catamaran because I want something which is potentially fast and certainly faster than a monohull. And at the same time, it's got a lot of surface for displaying a lot of solar panels, but that's besides the point. What is really very important in this case, you can produce electricity. So we're sailing here, we're sailing for 2 or 3 hours and testing, and we come back into the port with fully charged batteries.
Okay, yeah, so that's an interesting explanation. I mean, fascinating. I know what those motors can do.
Well, I have a report. I posted a report in various languages, not just English, on on cornellsailing.com. And you should read it because I just described this very instance when we did this test here in La Grande Motte.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is really good. Actually, Arno he was sort of poking around asking, yeah, so given all that, what's your opinion of Amels? Have you had experience on Amels?
Well, yes, I mean, I've said that with friends and so on. I think that among monohulls, it's really, from in my view, is the top of a comfortable, reliable boat for a couple. Also, it's got, as you know, Bill will certainly agree with that. It's got a very good resale value, which is very important when you make such a huge investment. I think that if you're looking at a monohull, cruising along the tropics and so on, you should consider it. If you're looking at going out of your way in Spitsbergen, Northwest Passage, Antarctica, then not. Then I would rather opt for the Exploration 45 or Exploration 52 and so on. It's a tough aluminum boat, more suited for high latitudes. But along the typical cruising routes of the world, yeah, and Amel is perfect.
Well, that's great. So now Dennis had a question. Where would you think is a good place to winter in the south of the Mediterranean Sea?
In the south, well, Tunisia possibly. I mean, I've been there and it was everything okay. COVID has changed a lot of things. I cannot, I mean, I haven't been to Tunisia for a few years, but if you mean in the south of Europe, not south of the Mediterranean, in southern Europe, there's more and more people are, well, Greece is not so much, maybe some parts of Croatia, still some parts of Turkey. There's some ports in Italy and Sardinia, for example. Yeah, there are quite a large number of ports. And the best thing I can advise is to start looking in good time and then hopefully get opinions from people who've spent the winter there. But basically, if you want to stay on board, you have to pick one sort of marina. If you want to leave the boat behind safe, then there are very good boat yards in Greece, for example, near Athens. You just leave the boat in October, you come back in April or May, and they restart your cruising. Don't plan too much on cruising in the Mediterranean, as I said at the beginning, between late October, more or less from now until Easter. You will not enjoy it. So it's better to leave the boat and get yourself a car and travel and visit Europe by car.
Okay. So thank you very much. I don't see any additional questions here going on. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, Bill, go ahead.
Jimmy, thank you so much for, you got a tremendous busy schedule. I really want to thank you so much for joining us for this Zoom meeting. And, you know, what you did is exemplary of what you always do. Most of you don't know, but he doesn't have power. He is locked out of an office and he's doing this from his car. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for doing this. We really appreciate it. And good luck on your no carbon venture. We're going to be following you. Judy and I are both going to be following you, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much. And I want to say again that I'll be really posting reports from this voyage because I'm just as interested myself in this concept, how it's going to work. I think this might very well be the future of cruising because so much is happening. So many marinas now are not happy about people using their engines, not to speak about protected bays and anchorages and so on. We have to move into that direction. And I hope my experience and this project will show that it can be done. And by the way, Bill, I only did this because you and Judy are such nice guys, and we really got on so well together. And I'm very happy that I managed to you speak to your owners association. Thank you.
Thank you. Tilo?
Okay, well, it's everybody, I'm getting a lot of great reactions from the audience. Jimmy, thank you very much. And a lot of people are just amazed at your outstanding efforts. And so I am as well. I've really enjoyed talking and working with you. And I also want to thank Bill. Thank you very much for setting this up. It's been, I know you put a lot of energy into it, and I do very much appreciate it. And so, yeah, it's been a great meeting. We'll look forward to seeing you next month then and I think Bill, you said you were going to be announcing that later on.
Yeah, I'm working on the next great person, but Jimmy's a hard act to follow. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Bill.
Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you, Jimmy.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye. Bye.
Have a
James.
good day and good night, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, very good.
Okay.
So
Thanks a lot, Jimmy. And I'll let you get back to your boat, and hopefully you've still got some battery left. And so that's great.
It all worked out very well. Bye-bye.
It did. Thanks a lot, Jimmy. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.